Well, welcome everyone to Anxiety Simplified Podcast. I am Joanne Williams and here to share some powerful strategies with you that I've used with my clients as a 30-year mental health professional to lower anxiety simply that you can use and bring right into your own home or car. We hope that this will make your life just a little bit easier and happier. And thank you all for our loyal listeners for making this possible. And today I have a very special guest. I'm going to introduce in just one moment Amanda Waldron. And she's an LCSW, same as me. So we got that in common. And she's going to tell her story of a life experience that pretty much shook her faith and now wants to help her clients as a licensed mental health professional. And she's just launched a new venture called Hi, Amanda. Hey, Amanda. Hey, Amanda. A mentoring program where anyone can come by video chat who are having doubts about their beliefs in their Christian faith to be listened to and supported. And Amanda is a clinical social worker that works in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where she supports clients around anxiety and life transitions and distressing life events as their therapist. So, welcome, Amanda, and thanks for being here. And you have your own deconstruction journey. I'd love to hear more about that. That you want to share about that, what you've learned on your journey, maybe to make the process easier for others to really overcome some shame and keep their faith. So, welcome. So, tell us more.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, so about 10 years ago, I went through this really big shifting of faith beliefs that I had been thinking about becoming a long-term missionary. I had grown up in the church. Christian faith had always been really important for me. And growing up, I recognized that there were some discrepancies on how people believed, even within the same faith. But I was usually able to ask my dad about that, get some satisfying answers, and didn't really have a lot of doubt or questions growing up. But around my mid 20s, I had an experience that kind of just shook my faith to the foundation. Had thought about going on to long term missions, needed a sending church, and in the process, connected back with the church that I grew up in. But the church I grew up in and the mission organization had some different beliefs that they could not see past.
Hmm.
And so it came to this head that my church that I grew up in did not feel comfortable sending me with this organization. And at that point, it just kind of blew my mind of like, hey, this is Christianity. How can there be so many different ways to believe within this? And so, me, in my this is prior to knowing that I had some anxiety, some anxious thinking, really was like, okay, there must be one right way to believe about this, and I am going to find it. And so I would start with a theological concept and then realize that there were multiple ways people believed about it. And not only were there multiple ways that people believed about that, but then it would take me to a sub theological concept until it was like down this rabbit hole of just pure anxiety and a little bit of depression that set in of this, wow, how could this be so much different? I'm having all these doubts and questions. There isn't one right way to believe. And so how do I know if I'm doing it right?
Doing it right, fear.
Yes. So that led
Yes.
me, yeah, that actually led me into my first counseling experience, where there was enough distress in my life that I was like, I need somebody's help to figure this out. I cannot get to the bottom of this by myself. So during that time, I ended up going to counseling, getting diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, which made total sense looking back on my life of how that played into this faith journey as well. And then also ended up taking some seminary classes at the same time, kind of getting that academic and that therapy aspect in, which was really helpful because both of those experiences helped me lessen that black and white thinking and move more into that gray, and being comfortable with uncertainty.
All right. So, kind of black and white thinking. So why don't we talk about that for a second? What does that even look like? I mean, it's one or the other. It must be one or the other. It can't be both kind of a thinking. Is that how you looked at that?
Yeah. Black and white thinking is really trying to keep somebody safe, keep somebody on the path of like, this is the right way. And if you do the right thing, then you're going to avoid pain. So in the faith context, that could look like, okay, if I read my Bible, if I do my devotions, then God will be happy with me and bless me. But if I don't do
Mm.
that, then God's probably going to be upset with me. Or it could mean if I don't believe this, then does that, yeah, am I either I believe this or I'm not a Christian?
Kind of leaves people out then
Mm-hmm.
in some way, or how did you see it for yourself? How did you reckon that, I guess I would say? How did you come to terms with what you needed to do with that?
Oh, it took a lot of practice because I think these are just really automatic thinking patterns. So without even my knowledge, I think my brain was working like this for most of my life. So most of those growing up years where my faith was solidified, it was also probably mingled with a lot of this black and white thinking. And so really I credit cognitive behavioral therapy as just a modality that was super helpful for me to be like, okay, is there any other way, any other story in here besides if I don't do this, God is mad at me? Is there any other option?
And
And
what did you
usually the answer
find?
is yes.
Because cognitive behavioral therapy for people, out there in the world, we're in a clinical world, we'll use
Mhm.
these kind of words. And my editor is always telling me, don't use fancy words, you know, because a lot of people don't speak this language that we do as therapists. But you're saying what is cognitive behavioral therapy to you?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
how did it
So
help you?
so cognitive behavioral therapy is really this idea around the linkage between what we think affecting how we feel and then how we react. So I always kind of describe it as everybody comes to the world with a certain lens, and that lens is influenced by our family of origin. So what did we grow up learning, either directly or indirectly, caught or taught? Our own personality. So we may skew more toward the anxious side or may more the melancholy side, and then our lived experiences. So all of that shapes how we come to the world. So if an event happens, that's why I may see it one way and you may see it another way.
Right.
Same event, same facts, different interpretations. So cognitive behavioral therapy really looks at what are those automatic thoughts that maybe we didn't even think to question, and how are they impacting us? And the more rigid our thoughts tend to be, the higher our distresses. So we'll get more of that anxiety, that anger, that depression.
Why
Um,
is that, do you think? That rigid thinking would make you more anxious if something didn't go your way or whatever.
because
How
we
would you explain that?
crave we crave certainty and want to avoid pain. So if there's some sort, like we can get some sort of methodology or some way of like, okay, if I do this, then this is supposed to happen.
Yeah.
We're really trying to avoid pain.
Yeah, and that uncertainty. If we put it in the context of what we've been through in the last year with COVID, that's
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I've really seen so high in people, this uncertainty and unknowing, or not knowing what might happen next. So this is kind of another level, not level maybe, but another way that this can make uncertainty, because what you used to believe, maybe even as a child, or what you were
Yeah.
taught, is not coming true right now. And you're seeing these two churches. How can this be? And so you're questioning,
Mhm.
some foundational thoughts then, what
Yeah.
you
And I
thought
would
was
say
the way it was.
the foundational thoughts. Like
The
my faith
foundational.
like was one of the big pieces that made my lens. And then all of a sudden, if you take that away, I wasn't even sure how to see the world, how to
Mm.
interpret things.
Did that even affect your self-esteem or your self-worth even? So it went deeper and on different ways in yourself?
Yeah, I think
It
it can
did.
really, yes, for me it did personally, that there was depression mingled in with that around like, yeah, am I doing this right? Are people going to be upset that my beliefs are shifting? I don't even want to tell anybody about this because it feels shameful, like I'm doing something wrong or I'm not a good Christian because I'm having these questions or doubts.
Wow. So it did go really deep. And were you able to check that out? Did people actually judge you for these thoughts? Did you have negative reactions from family or church or friends?
I not really because I didn't share it with anybody.
Oh, you didn't.
Um,
You kept it to yourself. So that's the shame piece that maybe we're
yeah,
going to get to. So that shame, do you think, kept you like you were real? This is serious. You
yeah,
really
looking
did
back on it,
something
right?
wrong. You're
Like shame is that we get it's how we feel about ourselves, but how we think others are going to feel about us. And so shame
yeah.
is really like really thrives when we don't talk about it. And so there was that period of time before I was in therapy where it was just this downward spiral and I really wasn't telling anybody, but people could probably like, I think my whole demeanor changed, but I wasn't talking about it.
But that's the depression. And depression, maybe to a lot of different people, are different things as well that maybe we need to explain because it could be different for different people.
Mm-hmm.
Some people even see sadness, as depression.
Mm-hmm.
But you're saying the spiral that took you, and what did it do for you that you felt like
Yeah, it
made
was
you not
I remember it
look
just
at the
being really
world
dark. And there were months where
dark?
I was like crying every day.
Really?
Um, yeah, because really that identity that I had, my identity was really placed in my Christian faith, and so that was shifting, and it really kind of pulled out like, okay, who even am I if this is shifting? Plus, I
So,
don't think I had a great sense of self in my mid 20s anyway, so there's maybe a
yeah.
couple factors going on.
And people out there, that is so true. I think before we're 30, it is always shifting, but you're shifting from almost like a child's view, like you said, caught and taught,
Yeah.
but you were taught something and you believed it and you worked with it and it all worked. But then this
Hmm.
happened, this two churches colliding, and now you're like, question, did you feel like you questioned everything at that point? It's like
Yeah.
nothing felt
It was
solid
like,
under your
if this
feet.
isn't true, then what else
What
isn't
is?
true? Hmm.
Yeah. So who am I? So you questioned a lot. And then so tell us, what were some of the things that really helped you maybe shift out of this? Because I know you talked about 3 ways to shift this shame to
Yeah.
actually self-compassion, which I think is such a powerful word, self-compassion, because it seems like
Hmm.
compassion, you're supposed to think about other people, right? It's
Yeah.
about them, it's easy, but what about yourself? So that does sound like a big shift. So what did you find was helpful?
Yeah. So I think really kind of getting that understanding of the way that we perceive events, the way we perceive information may not be accurate. Like our lens may be
Oh.
off a little bit and needs some tweaking to make that more flexible. And so, really, I think some of that work around shame is kind of getting familiar with what shame is. So, Brene Brown is kind of the foremost researcher on shame. So, she's pretty popular. If you haven't found her, go and look up her stuff. It's great. She talks about shame as being that really painful feeling of not feeling loved or feeling like you belong. And so
Accepted.
in the
Hmm.
faith aspect, if your faith is shifting away from the community that you grew up in, it can feel like this I don't belong. Or what are people going to think if I start
Hmm.
thinking something different or believing something different?
And what? I'd throw in too, maybe even pleasing. Some aspects
Ooh,
of defenses that we've used in our personality development for our identity. What do we do? And maybe we do use pleasing others, even if you don't really believe it, because you don't know what you believe. And
yeah,
so this kind of brought this even to your forefront. Maybe I can't please everybody. I wonder. I don't know if that did, but how can you please everyone
it
with your
did.
beliefs? It
Yeah, and
did.
that still plays out. Like so
It does.
part of this shame work too is recognizing like what are our triggers. So shame a lot will feel like a closing in, or like sometimes people describe they get it in the pit of their stomach, or they become really sweaty. So sometimes the first element of doing this work is recognizing, like, how do I experience shame in my body? What are the cues that tell me
Yeah.
like, ooh, this is shame? Or like, and mine is always, well, I get this from Brene too, but like the hustle. If you feel like you have to prove something or
Yeah.
please somebody,
There's a
that's a pretty,
defense against it.
yeah,
Yeah, you're putting up I don't know. I don't, this is unfamiliar. I don't know what this feels like. So let's stop that. Don't feel
yeah,
that. Oh,
yeah.
interesting.
So yeah, so that,
And you know what I've seen too is guilt. You know, and many religions or parenting, I felt like I was parented a lot with guilt that, if you're a good girl, you'll do this, And what does that mean?
yeah,
It means I'm totally a bad girl if I don't do
yeah,
everything the way right, So
yes,
that's almost like that same, it can slip in, I think, very easily into shame. And I would say even kind of addictions, a lot of addictions with
mm,
that secret that
yep,
you were just, I'm not talking about this, I don't really have a problem. And
mm-hmm,
that can also make that slippery slope into depression or even addictions to cover up
yeah.
that pain.
A lot of
Yeah,
times
interesting.
shame is a really sneaky emotion because shame does not like to be found out because it loses its power when we know about it. But a lot of times it is behind some of these other stronger emotions. So around like anxiety, depression, addiction, that oftentimes if we look close enough, shame is back there like pulling some strings. So
Hmm.
really yeah, like getting familiar with what shame is, bringing shame into the light because it can't stand being talked about. It loses some of its power when we start to
Mm.
tell our stories, start to connect with others, start to connect in therapy or with a close friend. Um,
So there might even be some resistance as you go through this, like like
oh, for
you are
sure.
really bad. You are extra bad if you're going to
Yeah.
go against whatever that value must be in yourself that you feel like somehow you're doing something wrong. So the
Yeah.
big judgment, maybe it's judgment is what
Yeah, that big judgment of like, and maybe not even trusting yourself to know what the truth is
trusting.
of like that difference between that guilt and that shame. Like I did something
Mm,
wrong versus I am something wrong. But I think we
mm.
can also get a lot of false guilt. That did we actually do something wrong? Where did that belief come from that this is wrong? Um,
That's a good one because, I will say also to clients a lot of times for guilt, it really does need to be examined a little further because as I see it, guilt is a good, a purpose to say, I always use the example of, when you're putting your hand in the cookie jar and mom says, nope, we're having dinner in 10 minutes. So don't do it. And you do it anyways. You're supposed to have a twinge. You're supposed to get something that tells you, no, this is wrong against your values of
mhm.
doing something that your mom says or right or wrong in that sense. So it gives us a guide to say, oh, that is something I need to
Yeah.
listen to. And so that's really important to notice. Like, and you even said, feel it in your body.
Mhm.
And in that sense, sometimes we'll have it in different places that we may feel this and to notice it and then examine, am I doing something wrong? Because I've been kind of conditioned in so many ways that I've just kind of always felt, that's what I felt. I felt like I was always doing something wrong. And I had
Yeah.
to start looking at that. How can I always be doing something wrong? So I kind of turned it around and said, wait a minute, I have to pull this apart and look at it. Am I doing something wrong right now against my morals and values?
Yeah.
And if I'm not, I decided it was more self punishment. And
Yeah.
so I had to stop that kind of behavior because that's not helpful at some
Yeah.
point. So that is how you're talking about in step one is really slow it down. It sounds like consciously really look at this, examine it, feel it.
Mhm.
And number two, you're talking about patterns of thinking that
Yeah.
keeps this going or not.
Yeah, that you kind of gave that perfect example that a lot of times these things are real, like especially if we get beliefs early on from our
Mhm.
family of origin or our community that we grow up in, like those are our automatic beliefs. we may not even be aware that there are things happening in our subconscious that are moving us toward that feeling of like, oh, I'm always doing something wrong. And so we just assume that it's true because that's how our brain has always operated. But just like we want to slow it down and feel shame in our body, we want to slow down those thinking patterns too of like, okay, wait a minute, what is anxiety? Like, what's the story anxiety is telling me right now? Or what's the story that shame's
Right.
telling me right now? And is that true?
Mm. So really examining these things. How would you recommend for people to slow that down or to examine that? Because I can just hear, we're such a fast-paced society in
Mm-hmm.
the US. This is people do listen to this internationally, but in the US, I think we are very fast-paced. And to slow down is hard because again,
Yeah.
it's that automatic pattern. Do you have any ways for people maybe to slow down or to look at this in some way that would be helpful for people that are kind of that fast-paced person?
Yeah. I mean, when I'm working with clients around this skill, and it is a skill because I don't think we are like, it's not something that comes naturally to us.
Mm-mm.
It's
Right.
really, again, in that cognitive behavioral therapy family, it's called a cognitive behavioral therapy log. So it's really like when you notice distress coming up, when you notice anxiety or that hustling or guilt coming up, it's pausing and maybe asking that question like, okay, what is the story that this emotion is telling me? So a lot of times I will sometimes when I notice anxiety too late is when I am like having really mean thoughts of cars in front of me, which is
Yeah.
usually a good sign that I need to slow down and be like, okay,
Mhm.
what story is anxiety telling you right now that you're going to be late, that someone's going to be mad? Okay, is that true? Is there another way to think about that? Or do I need to release control and be like, okay, I actually have no control how this other person drives.
So
Um,
control is kind of a feature of this. I'm hearing several times.
mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. So you're kind of taking control back maybe from your thoughts that are on autopilot.
Yeah,
Um,
which kind of goes into that the third part of this is that
mhm.
shifting to non-judgment of self, right? So if anxiety and shame can really like work in our minds automatically, a lot of the times if we're not aware of those concepts, they're just going and we're reacting to them as if they're true. What self-compassion does in the midst of this is it gives us back another option. So a lot of times
Mm.
when I was going through my anxiety and shame and my deconstruction, I just thought those stories were accurate or the way that I was thinking about myself was accurate. Of course, this must be right. Like, this is what I'm thinking. Of course, I'm doing something wrong. Of course, I'm going to upset somebody. But self compassion actually introduces this alternative way of thinking of ourselves that's kinder. So instead of just
Mm.
having this automatic reaction, now we have this choice of how to respond to these thoughts. And if I have a choice and one of them is kinder than the other, I'm going to see if I can access that kinder thought because that feels better than shame. Shame is it's just an awful feeling. And so we can cultivate that self-compassion by recognizing when we're in the midst of shame or anxiety. So we may say something like, okay, this really is hard when I am feeling like I'm letting somebody down. We connect ourselves back to the human experience because there's no, but like you can't get out of being human without experiencing shame. Everyone experiences it, but we don't talk
Mm.
about it. So we don't recognize that how universal it is.
Yeah, and I hear in this too acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
That once you can get out of that judgment or that critical self or that critical way you may look at a situation yourself or others, and you start to have that human experience and of going, we all have some of this. It's not just me.
Yeah.
I can accept that at this moment I'm learning something and it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
feel right, but I have a choice about it and I can shift it. But I love your concept about self compassion because I just don't see we have enough of it. It's one of those feelings, let's make more. You can't have enough
Yeah.
compassion in this world.
Yeah.
And is that what you came to with your religious experience that, or what happened with your two churches too? How did that story end up?
And
Did you go on a mission or?
no, I didn't. I ended up actually, it's funny because there's a direct line between my deconstruction and reconstruction of my faith and then going and getting my master's in social work and doing the work that I do now. So it really was
It
such a
was a
transformative,
different mission.
yeah, yeah, a transformative experience in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, so there was a big shift for you.
Hmm.
And it went into what I would call clinical way to help people instead of maybe what you thought you were going to do at a seminary classes or seminary way or in the church's missions or whatever you
Yeah.
thought. But
Hmm.
are you feeling satisfied or are you feeling content now with some of the choices and the change in your mindset that was able to be resolved with doing
Yeah.
your process?
Yes, 100%, right?
Hey.
If that hadn't been the catalyst for getting like doing my own work, like the way that I talk to myself now, this compassion, the may I statements, may I be patient in this process, may I
Mm.
accept where I'm at, like yeah, totally changed the way that I think about.
It's wonderful. And now you've decided to do a mentoring program. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and maybe invite people, to join that if that's something you've found that's been helpful because that sounds really powerful to help people through this
Yeah.
process because it was a process for you.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, it's kind of the culmination of 10 years of experience, both like my clinical education, my life experience, but yeah, there is just a big, so I'm a millennial. There's a huge shift in the church right now, over the last, I don't know, 5 years, where there is just an exodus from faith because there is a lot of discrepancy between cultural Christianity, what people were taught, what they've been experiencing. And so there is this kind of mass exodus, and it kind of feels like there's this either or. Either I have to stay in unreally unhealthy faith patterns, or I have to leave Christianity altogether. And I kind of want to stand in the middle of that and be like, okay, is there another way that we can think about this where we can maybe reconcile or toss out some of these teachings that aren't helpful and maybe never were, and you can still keep those authentic parts of the Christian faith. And so, yeah, I launched this program called Hey Amanda. You can find me at heyamandawaldron.com. And so there's going to be a group program that's launching this fall. There's some freebies online. There's a quiz where you can see if your mind is trapped in any of these kind of thinking patterns that may be a little bit more rigid. So that's at heyamandawaldron.com/quiz if anyone wants to go there and take that.
What would help them taking that quiz? What will they find there that, you think would be helpful for them?
Yeah. So number one, you'll kind of get familiar with if you have any of those thinking patterns, and spoiler alert, all of us do. Most of us have a thinking trap that we get caught in.
Yeah.
And then on the results page that you'll get from taking that quiz, I've also included
Um,
some three steps. So
oh,
some questions to ask, some things to remember, and then a practical thing. Some of them have what you can do like somatically, so with your body, how to calm down the anxiety that comes up with doubting
oh,
questions, and
good.
some other practical tips too.
Wonderful. So, this is a very practical way, listeners, to be able to see where your thinking is and some ways it sounds like to shift them in a way to help lower your guilt, shame, or anxiety
Mm-hmm.
about some of these thinking patterns. Oh, that's wonderful, Amanda. And I want to encourage everybody to go there and get that and look for themselves so that you can do some of your own self exploration and then join Amanda and I would assume, do they give you your email so you'll have them if you'll in want to join
Yes.
you for the
So
fall?
if you take the quiz, you'll be put on my email list. So monthly, I'm also sending out tips to help with this as well. And there's some other freebies coming down the pipeline too.
Oh, good. Well, wonderful. Any last thoughts you want to share with us, Amanda?
Yeah, I just want to encourage you, if you are feeling a lot of shame, anxiety, that there are tools out there that could lessen that, make that easier to hold, and help you find that kind of third way of thinking about things.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. That's always my message. Reach out. There is so much information out there, whether there's like podcasts like this or quizzes like you're offering. There is help. And I'm really glad you said that, because that's my encouragement to reach out, talk to somebody. There is always somebody there to help.
Mhm.
Well, so thank you so much, Amanda, for being here. And, I do want to make sure listeners and for the video too, that, this is by no means a replacement for therapy, for any kind of medical attention. If you need it, always reach out and take care of yourself. Or if you are feeling like you ever want to hurt yourself, there is always somebody standing by 24/7 at 1-800-273-8255, or you can call 911. But this is about self acceptance. Absolutely. Wherever you are in that mess, we're talking about today with this message, love yourself, take care of yourself, and practice these skills today that Amanda was so kind to share with you, so you can feel more joy in your life. Or you can always contact us also at anxietysimplified.net to find out more about maybe how an emotional support animal or a psychiatric service dog might be that support that you need through these troubling times that we're coming out of. However, I am finding people are even more overwhelmed. Kind of now, it's just like that uncertainty might be over, but I'm telling you, people are needing more help than ever. So please reach out. So thank you, listeners. We really appreciate you being here. And please show your support by rating, reviewing, and subscribing to our podcast, Anxiety Simplified. So thanks for being here. Bye for now.